Welcome everyone, and thanks for joining the Native Alternatives to Common Invasive Garden Plants webinar. I'm Megan Pistolese-Shaw, the Education Outreach Coordinator with SLELO PRISM. I also have Melanie Cutillo with the Lazy Dirt Flower Farm joining us today. And this webinar is in observance of New York's 10th Annual Invasive Species Awareness. And during the week of June 5th through the 11th, events are being held across the state to raise awareness of invasive species and to engage the public. NYISAW is coordinated by the New York State DEC in collaboration with community members and a network of organizations, Partnerships for Regional Invasive Species Management, or PRISMs. More about invasive species awareness and to see a list of all the planned events, please visit NYSIS.info/NYISAW. And here's a snapshot of what we will discuss today, and there will be time to answer questions at the end of the presentation. And you can feel free to add your questions as guys in the chat box, and we will go ahead and get to those for you. And I'd just like to begin by sharing a little background about PRISMs, or Partnerships for Regional Invasive Species Management. PRISMs were stemmed from the recommendations from the New York State Invasive Species Task Force. And the PRISM network, it began back in 2005 and then became fully established in 2014. And there are 8 PRISMs that span New York that coordinate invasive species management initiatives within their boundaries. And PRISMs are an integrative approach to invasive species management, restoration, and outreach. The network is funded by the Environmental Protection Fund in coordination with the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, various host organizations, and their partners. You can connect with your local PRISM, learn more about invasive species, and get involved in community science at NYSIS.info/PRISMs. And before we go too deep, let's just start with basics and consider what invasive species are. An invasive species is a plant, an animal, or even an organism that is not native to the ecosystem they've become established in, and whose introduction causes harm to the economy, the environment, or to human health. The term invasive species can be easily confused, as there are many non-native species that are not considered to be invasive. For example, bulls and many other agricultural plants are non-native species considered to be beneficial to our culture rather than harmful. And there are also non-native species that are considered to be a nuisance, but are not invasive, like dandelions, for example. You may wonder why some non-natives are so invasive. It's because when a species is introduced to a new environment, they enter that area free from natural predators that would keep their populations in balance in their native range. And in addition, invasives also often produce many offspring or seeds. For example, just one purple loosestrife plant can produce millions of seeds annually. Because of these characteristics, invasive populations often become widespread, which you can see in the bottom picture that shows invasive common reed or mighty filling an entire field with just a single shrub in the mass. In addition to lacking natural predators, invasive species also have attributes that allow them to thrive in environments that other species may not do so in, such as poor soil conditions. And pictured on the top right shows invasive knotweed growing right out of a hole in concrete. Invasive species are so bad for the environment. There are many different ways that invasive species can be introduced to an area. A major introduction pathway is through global trade. Species around the world hitchhike in water and on cargo crates and often go undetected until they have spread far distances in their new homes. Many plants that are now considered to be invasive were actually once considered desirable ornamentals that were often intentionally planted in gardens and yards and landscapes. For example, invasive bush honeysuckles are invasive plants that were once planted by gardeners to beautify their lawns or by highway designers to control erosion or to stabilize banks. However, over time, non-native species, they can misbehave and escape our and invade our natural areas where they often outcompete natives and desirable plant species and can impact entire ecosystems. Someone said that having a hard time hearing me. Melanie, are you hearing me?
I can hear you, Megan, but it's a little bit in and out, just a tad.
All right, let me see. Because I'm connected to the internet. All right, do a test. Can you hear me now? I feel like I'm in a Verizon commercial. I'm still breaking up. Can you hear Melanie when she speaks?
Yeah, can you hear me okay without any choppy?
Huh. Well, what am I doing different? No, I don't know how to add captions. Let me see if I can figure that out. Captions. That's so weird. I had that happen before. English. All right, testing. Can you see the captions at the bottom? All right. Wire might need, it's just my laptop computer. I don't have any ears. I wish I had my headphones, but I'm in a different office today. Well, I put captions on. So I really apologize, but I'm not sure how to fix that problem. I'll just try to speak slowly and clearly. And the captions are on. So hopefully that helps you all. Thank you for telling me. So where was I? Okay, so however, you can play a vital role in preventing the introduction and the spread of invasive plants just by choosing to grow the native plants in your garden and your yard. So choosing to grow the species not only reduces the spread of invasive plants, but it also supports native wildlife. And this is because the plants have co-evolved with the native wildlife and insects. And there are many specialized relationships that exist between plants, birds, and pollinators. For example, native birds like the chickadee, they rely on caterpillars to rear their young, and native plants support caterpillars. And the monarch butterflies, they need native milkweed to complete their life cycle. Without the milkweed, the monarch larvae will die. Invasive swallowwort is an invasive plant closely related to the native milkweed, and the monarch get confused and lay their eggs in the invasive swallowwort, which is actually toxic to the monarch caterpillars. So by choosing to grow native plants in your garden, you are supporting the birds, the wildlife, and the pollinators that we all rely on for a majority of our crops. There are a few easy steps that you can take to support pollinators in your own garden. Tip number one is to diversify the plant types that you have in your garden. Nature doesn't grow just one plant, and neither should we. So different plants use and give different nutrients in the soil and are used for by different insects, birds, and other wildlife. Providing diversity will not only make your garden more beautiful, but it will support more pollinators and wildlife and make your garden more resilient against pests, pathogens, and invasive species. Introduce a minimum of 15 different types of plants in your garden, and don't limit yourself to just blooming flowers. Introduce herbs and shrubs, vines, and trees to your landscape. The more the merrier, right? Butterflies, they tend to like the long tubular flowers. They like red and orange and yellow. And moths, they like night blooming flowers like gypsumweed, evening primrose. And bees, they can't see the red, so blue flowers will attract bees. And consider the plant's sunlight, the water, and nutrient needs in selecting the species that you introduce to your garden. Pollinators need nectar sources in one season, so grow a variety of flowers that will produce the blooms from early springs through the fall, and do not only provide a food source throughout the growing season, but it will give you beautiful blooms that you can enjoy as well. And many of you may think of daffodils or crocus or hyacinths and tulips for springtime blooms, but some native alternatives could include trout lily or Virginia bluebells, May apple, Jacob's ladder, and some common summertime blooms such as lilies, daisies, zinnias could be substitutes for coneflower, New York ironweed, phlox, maximum, and other native sunflowers. And rather than mums, consider bee balm, black-eyed Susans, or asters, perhaps. Don't forget that winter is also a season, and that the dry blooms of asters and the sunflowers will provide for overwintering birds. And now I'd like to give Melanie a moment to talk about arrangements.
Whoops. Megan's telling me I can't do the start video, so I'm just
That's
going to
okay.
jump right in.
Yep.
So when you arrange native plants, it's a little bit different. You want to always consider the arrangements of the plants in your garden from the perspective of pollinators. You want to make it easy on pollinators to use your plants by arranging them in groups of 3, 5, or more. This reduces the amount of travel and work a pollinator will have to take to collect pollen and nectar. I often say to people who are new to native plants that native plants are as lazy as, or pollinators are as lazy as we are. They want a remote too. They don't want to have to change the station. So you want to make sure you're arranging where things are close by so that they don't have to expend so much energy. The really good resource for arranging is Pretty Purple Door. It suggests 4 different ways to group your plants. Drifts of 3 to 5 are one of the easiest way to group your plants. It'll be easier on your back. And often in odd numbered clusters to make them stick out in a landscape. They're easier to see for the pollinators and more enjoyable for you to see as well. You can also arrange your plants in drifts around a focal point or a focal plant. Rather than planting in straight rows, arrange plants in a weaved clustered rows. I just met a woman the other day who arranges her plants using marbles. She'll take 5 marbles and just gently toss them, and where they land, that's where all those coneflowers went. So it's really pretty arrangement. Then you want to avoid cultivars. There are so many beautiful plants that you can find to put in your garden. But if you're wanting to support pollinators first, it's important to choose native species that they have evolved with and avoid cultivars or nativars. A native plant is a species that occurs naturally in a particular habitat or region, and a native species has co-evolved specifically with native plants and pollinators know how to use those plants. While a nativar is a result of artificial selection for traits such as bigger blooms or other exaggerated plant parts, these alterations do not benefit pollinators because pollinators instinctively are often not able to utilize the nativars or sometimes even confused by them. For example, bees looking for the original purple color of coneflower plants, not manipulated in yellow, orange, or pink blooms of the many nativar varieties available at garden centers. That's kind of confusing if you're a bee that's evolved with one specific coneflower. Lastly, not all pollinators are butterflies and bees, and this is really important to consider. There are many different insects that help pollinate, such as moths, beetles, and even lightning bugs. And I dare say, mosquitoes are also pollinators. Male mosquitoes feed on nectar at night. Anyway, pollinators are also have larval stages that need support too, like caterpillars. Consider this when you're choosing your garden plants and try to pick some plants that will support the caterpillars and larvae of those pollinators. Many of us know milkweed supports the monarch caterpillar, but there are lots of other host plants to consider. The Xerces Society has a wonderful resources for native host plants for pollinators and beneficial insects, which will include in your follow-up email. And this is a great one because of Great Lakes, specifically to our region. There are many resources available. Oh, go ahead, Megan.
Yep. Thanks, Melanie. So I'm going to turn my video off. Maybe that might help with the connection too. So there are actually many resources available to you to learn what is and what is smart to your region, all of which I'll briefly mention here and will be provided in the email. So National Wildlife Federation has developed a tool to help you identify plants that are native to your zip code. And the state DEC has developed brochures and plant lists that showcase plants that are native to the East and what plants to avoid and their native alternatives. And the Northeast Regional Invasive Species and Climate Change Management Group, or RISC, has developed a brochure that outlines gardening for present and future conditions using native species adapted to both the current and the future hard zones, with a list of climate plants native to the Northeast. And SLELO PRISM has created a list of non-native trees as part of our Urban Forest Sustainability Initiative. And these resources are also available on the SLELO PRISM web and virtual toolboxes as part of our Pledge to Protect, which I'll share more about later. And to learn what plants are considered to be invasive in New York State, you can reference the New York State Prohibited and Regulated Invasive Plant List. Regulated invasive plants can be sold and used in New York, but can't be nationally introduced to natural areas, whereas a prohibited species cannot be sold or used in New York State. There's also an online database for invasive species called IMAP Invasives that you can use to report invasives, or you can learn of species that are invasive and where they are actually confirmed present in New York. You can also reference the New York Flora Atlas to learn what plants are native to your county. So many of the species covered next were introduced to the United States as ornamental or landscape plants and have since spread to become invasive. As mentioned, invasive plants have not co-evolved with our native wildlife, and therefore they don't support ecosystems in the same way native plants do. But the news is that each of the invasive plants have even better alternatives that you will want to use in the garden. Following this session, we'll also share some general management tips with you. Melanie is going to share some tips about the plant names with us.
So sometimes reading plant names when you're in a nursery or a large garden center can get really confusing. There's a lot of marketing out there as well to combat. But if you look at the label, you'll see that the scientific names can be a little hard to overcome because you're going to try to pronounce them. Don't worry about it. It's just know how to read the label in the garden center is the most important thing. Here's what you need to know about reading those plant labels for native plants. Yes. The scientific name versus the common name. You're going to see the scientific name is always going to be in italics. It will not have quotes or some like Echinacea purpura powwow. Powwow will not be anything at the end of a pure species of Echinacea. So Echinacea purpura is the scientific name. Purple coneflowers are the common name. And in this example, ruby giant, that is a significant way to read the label to know that that is actually a nativar. Everything in quotes, those fancy names usually means it's not a native plant at all. It's been modified for your enjoyment and not for that of pollinators. If you are in doubt, use an app or science or field guide to look up the plant. We have those at the end as well. Megan, what did you want to add?
Oh yeah, so the nurseries, they are to comply with the New York State Part 575, the prohibited and regulated list that I mentioned earlier. And they can't sell any of the plants on that list, but they can sell regulated plants. So sometimes you encounter a label that says invasive species or regulated species or something like that. And that's to indicate to you to maybe choose a native alternative instead. Or just to at least be very able to not plant it somewhere where it can escape into like the forest or something like that. Okay, so let's get right into it and talk about some invasive species that are found in gardens or yards, starting with the bush honeysuckles. I'm sure most of us have seen this or may even have it in your yard. These are deciduous shrubs and they can grow to be about 15 feet tall. There are also native honeysuckles, and an easy way to tell them apart is to cut a branch off and look for a hollow hole in the cross section. Invasive honeysuckles are hollow. The invasive bush honeysuckles leaf out early in the spring, and they hold their leaves late into fall, which makes them easier to spot as well. And they have small light to dark pink or white flowers that form in the spring or summer. And then later in the season, they'll have to orange berries. They'll form, and it depends on the variety, what color berries you get and flowers. And the bush honeysuckles, they shade out native vegetation, and they reduce high quality food available for birds. So the birds, they will eat the fruit of the bush honeysuckle, but it provides more carbs and is a much lower quality nutrition source than the native berries that provide more fats. So think of birds eating fast food every day instead of eating something more nutritious. You can do a prescribed burning, hand pulling of seedlings, cutting, and herbicide treatments are all control options for the bush honeysuckle, but keep in mind that trimming it back without removing the roots or applying an herbicide will result in resprouting. So you need to cut or dig up around the bush and maybe even wrap a chain around the base and use a large truck to pull the chain to remove the roots. That's how extensive these root systems can be.
There are native honeysuckles like trumpet or coral honeysuckle, but some other great alternatives are downy serviceberry and American elderberry, both of which have medicinal purposes and support wildlife. For example, native honeysuckles attract hummingbirds. Serviceberry shrubs bloom early in the spring, making them an essential early season food source for pollinators, particularly early emerging queen bumblebees. American elderberry have pollen-heavy flowers that attract a wide variety of pollinators, and their leaves provide food for many moth larvae, including the very pretty Cecropia moth. Isn't she pretty?
Yes.
I love her spots.
So butterfly bushes, they're very eye-catching, they're hardy, seemingly helpful to butterflies. The word butterfly is in their name, right? They're invasive. They're not listed on your prohibited regulated list, but they are listed as invasive on IMAP invasives and the invasive plant atlas. So these shrubs, they escape cultivation and they invade natural areas. They crowd out plants, which reduces the habitat for pollinators and other wildlife. Each of the blooms produce tens of thousands of seeds that are easily carried by wind and water, remaining valuable for up to 5 years or more with a high germination rate. So although butterflies are attracted to their long cone-shaped bright flowers and the plant does provide nectar, it doesn't support the life cycle of the butterflies, which need host plants to lay their eggs on. There are no native caterpillars that eat butterfly bush leaves. So the butterfly bush can be controlled by cutting the trunk off at the base and applying herbicide to the exposed cut. And smaller bushes can be dug up, making sure to collect the root system as well. Melanie?
Oops, sorry, I accidentally hit the mute button. Sometimes when we are looking for a native alternative, we look for similar features. For example, what makes butterfly bush so attractive to us is the purple color, the shape of flower and foliage in the garden. But we need to remember that it's really about the habitat and the pollinators we're trying to support. Some native alternatives to butterfly bush are the beautifully and super fragrant summer sweet, blazing star, giant hyssop, which all have beautiful fragrant flowers that attract many, many pollinators and hummingbirds. All three of these plants are also drought tolerant, disease resistant, and act, hooray, as natural pest repellents. Another added benefit is that they provide seeds for overwintering birds.
Another invasive shrub is multi-rose. This plant has thorns and clusters of white flowers, as opposed to native roses, which only have one flower at the end of each stem. It forms red berries in the season, and multiflora rose produces thick brambles, which excludes native vegetation and makes it nearly impossible and very painful to walk through. I've walked through a lot of this doing my surveys, and it definitely hurts. And this plant is the first of the rosette disease, which disfigures rose flowers and leaves and causes excessive thorniness and can be easily spread by infected plants. And the multiflora rose seeds can remain viable in the soil for up to 20 years. So even if you remove the plant, they can still pop up over time. So mowing the plant often throughout the growing season for multiple years will kill the plant. Small plants can be controlled by hand digging and removing the roots.
Native alternatives for multiflora rose are 9-bark, buttonbush, and spicebush. In addition to providing nectar and pollen to various species of bees and butterflies, 9-bark is also a host plant for several moth caterpillars, including the amazing unicorn caterpillar. Buttonbush is frequented by skippers, monarchs, virtually any butterflies that happen to be passing by. It's easily recognized by its unique flower. It brings a bit of Dr. Seuss to your garden. Spicebush provides food to pollinators in the form of nectar, forage for several caterpillars, berries for birds, and forage for deer. This plant is an excellent choice for attracting wildlife to your area. Plus, it gives a beautiful display of golden yellow leaves in the fall. It also serves as a host plant for the spicebush caterpillar and butterfly. Spicebush caterpillars' faces provide excellent protection from predators and encourage you to grow more spicebush plants to see their cute faces peeking out. These caterpillars will curl up the leaves like little blankets as they create their cocoons for winter, leaving only their faces peeking out at you.
Barberry is an invasive shrub with thorns and is commonly used in landscaping. Unfortunately, they can easily escape our yards and grow in forests, as birds often feed and disperse their seeds. Leaves are arranged in little clusters, and red berries form late in the late season. Under its thick branches, it provides a nice protected habitat for mice and chipmunks. In areas with lots of barberry, tick populations often increase, which in turn increases the risk of Lyme disease. In areas invaded by barberry, there may also be an increase in invasive earthworm populations and soil erosion. Barberry can be cut back, but require herbicide application to keep it from resprouting. Melanie, are you muted again?
Two comparable native alternatives to invasive barberry are winterberry holly and the beautiful American hazelnut. The USDA reports that the berries of the winterberry provide food for small mammals and over 48 bird species. While the berries are low in fat content, they provide a valuable source of food in the winter when other sources of food are scarce. The environmental benefits of hazelnuts make them attractive plants for conservation that provide windbreaks, hedges, or riparian buffers. As a food source, hazelnut plants provide soft mast from their catkins and a hard mast in the fall and winter through their nuts, creating a very diverse food source for multiple animals.
Burning bush is an ornamental woody shrub with vibrant red to purple fall foliage and is very common invasive shrub found in yards. I see it everywhere. It can escape cultivation through its seeds and by sprouting new seeds when branches touch the ground. It is deer resistant, but this may encourage an increased browsing on native plants, and its shallow root system increases the rates of erosion. After cutting the main stem, a treatment of herbicide can be applied directly to the cut stump to kill the root system. Alternatively, returning to cut or mow or any resprouted stems will also support the regrowth of the burning bush.
There are some really great native alternatives out there for burning bush, including black chokeberry, serviceberry, American cranberry bush, and high bush blueberry. Plus, cranberry and blueberry are edible to you too. All of these plants provide food and habitat for wildlife and support pollinators. The high bush blueberry also provides nectar for pollinators and supports brown elfin larvae, which have one migration northward, appearing in our area in May through July.
Horseberry is an ornamental vine. It produces these greenish yellow flowers that develop into hard berries in various shades of purple to bright blue with a speckled sheen similar to porcelain, hence the name porcelainberry. It grows quickly and can compete native vegetation and strangles trees that it climbs onto. A combination of mechanical and chemical methods is most effective for porcelainberry. You can cut the vines near the ground and apply chemical herbicide to the remaining stem. Avoid pulling the vines off any of the vines that are in trees because this can damage the tree or it can cause injury to yourself. Cut vines will eventually decompose. All courses of treatment should be completed before fruiting occurs to avoid building a seed bank. Herbicide applied in the fall will draw the treatment to the roots more effectively.
Coral or trumpet honeysuckle, foxgrape, and American bittersweet are good native alternatives to the invasive porcelainberry. Coral honeysuckle flowers provide nectar for pollinators and attract hummingbirds, while foxgrape provides food for wildlife and people. But please note that American bittersweet berries provide food for birds, but all parts of this plant are considered poisonous to people. Please use caution when placing these in your garden to avoid accidental ingestions. Don't place near other edibles. Teach children how to recognize this inedible plant and berries like you would teach them about poison ivy.
There is an invasive bittersweet that looks similar to a native American bittersweet. So you can distinguish the invasive variety by the color and location of their fruit. The invasive bittersweet fruit, it starts out in color and then it turns yellow late in summer with the outer layers splitting into 3 parts, revealing a bright red fruit inside, which grows in clusters along the vine stems. The fruit helps to distinguish the invasive bittersweet from the native American bittersweet, which have berries with orange capsules, yellow, that grow in clusters on the vine tips rather than along the stem of the vine. Invasive bittersweet heats the trees, shrubs, and other vegetation through climbing and shading. They also kill trees by strangling or girdling them, and the berries are easily spread by birds. It can be controlled by cutting the vine close to the ground and digging up the roots, and again, pulling the vines out of trees because they will decompose. And the cut stems that are out should be treated with an herbicide after cutting. And again, the herbicide application can be applied best in the fall.
Native alternatives, again, are Virgin's Bower or Devil's Darning needles. Trumpet vine and American bittersweet are all good native alternatives to invasive bittersweet. The tubular flowers and large quantities of nectar produced by coral honeysuckle and trumpet vine attracts hummingbirds and as well as butterflies. As mentioned, the berries of American bittersweet are reported to be poisonous to humans. Songbirds, grouse, pheasants, and fox squirrels will all eat the fruits, but not you. You will not eat those fruits.
Tree lilac is a non-native tree. It's starting to be thought of as being invasive and is commonly found growing along streets and green spaces in urban areas. It can grow to be about 40 feet tall. It has reddish brown, cherry tree bark with dark green leaves that have a round base. It has small, fragrant flowers that grow in large white clusters in the spring, usually the beginning of June, so right around this time, but it only lasts for a few weeks. Saplings can be hand-pulled, larger trees are harder to manage, and pruning can reduce flowering.
Native alternatives to tree lilac are summer sweet, broadleaf meadowsweet, and native azaleas, which are absolutely gorgeous. Although not native, common lilacs are not invasive and would be a good alternative as well. All 3 have beautiful fragrant blooms that attract pollinators.
Okay, so during this next section, I'm just going to give you a few control methods. Invasive plants can be controlled manually, mechanically, or chemically. So manual control, such as digging and hand pulling, is most effective on small invasive plant populations. It is best done in the spring when plants are smaller and the soil is loose. It's important to remove the root system and avoid leaving behind plant fragments as they may resprout. Mechanical methods, mowing and cutting, are effective for medium-sized invasive plant populations, where hand pulling would be very cumbersome. It's best to cut the plants to ground level before flowering occurs, and mowing will likely occur multiple times throughout the growing season. To avoid resprout, remove the clippings from the site and solarize them, which means to place them in a sunny spot for 2 weeks prior to disposal or composting. If there are remains that have seeds, place those remains in a black plastic bag before solarizing. Chemical methods are most effective on medium to large-sized invasive plant populations where mechanical methods are unfeasible. It is important to follow all chemical label instructions to ensure effectiveness and avoid causing harm to the environment or even yourself. Apply the herbicide at peak growth for seed production. Fall is often the best time to apply herbicides to ensure the chemical is drawn to the plant's root system. Treated plants should be undisturbed for 2 weeks and no disposal is required. So now we're going to shift our discussion to share some ways that you can get involved. A fun and easy way to get involved is to take the Pledge to Protect. I mentioned this earlier. So upon taking the Pledge to Protect, you become a protector and you receive a monthly email blog showcasing simple actions that you can take throughout the year to protect your favorite outdoor spaces from the impacts of invasive species now and for generations to come. In addition, you'll have access to social media and virtual toolboxes with pre-made graphics you can share and resources to help you learn to recognize invasive species that you may encounter while hiking, boating, gardening, as well as best management practice guides and apps. Plus, you'll get to win prizes. And SLELO and our partners also have a variety of volunteer opportunities that you may enjoy. This June and July, we're looking for volunteers to aid terrestrial and aquatic invasive species removals and to help install plants as part of a restoration project happening at South Sandy Creek in Oswego County. Those who volunteer with us can participate in a challenge where you can earn prizes for each level of participation you achieve. We also offer trainings for those who want to help us survey for invasive species and report observations using a free smartphone app called Invasives. And a link to learn more about the opportunities will be in your follow-up email, or you can scan that QR code that you see on the screen to sign up to volunteer. And I have some upcoming volunteer dates listed on the screen here. If anybody wants to snap a quick photo or something, I'll pause just a second. Melanie also has some opportunities that you may have interest in.
I have a few workshops coming up this summer, as well as one in October. I have on-farm learning experiences because I have lots of invasive species at my place. They have to be taken out and native plants to be put in at my farm. I also do presentations to community groups and schools. In fact, next week I will be at the science fair at Sandy Creek School. Super excited about that. And I'm also looking to offer internships this year.
Okay, so that just concludes our presentation. I'd like to invite you to come off mute if you'd like to have a chat. We can answer some questions. I noticed in the chat, somebody said that the tree lilac is being planted all around Rochester, and it's not surprising. It is a commonly planted tree in our area. And as mentioned, it's not listed as a prohibited or related plant. It's thought to be becoming an invasive tree. So we're just raising awareness about it so folks can use one of the alternatives that we mentioned today. So to remove invasive species in Erie County, where exactly is that located? I could go back to,
Erie County, I believe, is in Western New York.
okay, so it would be your Western New York PRISM then. So if you go to NYISAW, I'm trying to get the slide opened up again. It's just taking a while because we have a lot of slides. You can go there and learn all about the PRISM network and what county or what PRISM your county belongs to. Whoops, I found it. Get this open again here. Okay, so you should be seeing the slide now of the PRISM network across the state. Erie County, okay, yeah, Western New York would be the PRISM that you want to connect with. SLELO is the one up here in the St. Lawrence, Eastern Lake, Ontario. That's what SLELO stands for. And we're at Oswego, Jefferson, and St. Lawrence counties. So a list of nursery in New York State that have these native plants. So some of the resources that I mentioned, I'm going to be sending you links to them. I'm trying to I'm going to be sending up with links to them. Where is it? There we go. Oh, it's frozen. So these are just some of the resources that I mentioned, and I'm going to put to each of these in your follow-up email. So that should give you a pretty good foundation to learn what's native in your area and where you can get the plants and what to grow.
And you can also check out your local habitat or wild ones chapter in your area. Wild ones chapters will have local nurseries that grow exclusively native species only.
Yes, thank you for reminding them of the wild ones. That's
Wild ones is a great resource.
Yeah, that's another one that's in our Garden Protectors virtual toolbox as well.
That's a great toolbox.
But yep, you use the DEC one all the time. I use it. So does anybody else have any more questions or comments? Also in the follow-up email, I'll be sending a link to the New York Invasive Species Awareness Week participant survey. So if you're kind to just fill out that quick survey, it helps us to quantify the efforts that we've all put together for NYISAW, and you'll also be entered to a prize. So keep an eye out for that follow-up. It should be in the next few days. We'll get that right out to you along with the recording.